Good afternoon. Thank you for joining me to talk about improving your grant process today. I'm the grant writer here at Support Kansas City, and most of what I do with our clients that are grant writing clients is work on the application portion itself. But there are a lot of other phases of the grant funding process. Most guides and trainings do tend to focus primarily on the writing the application itself, but we're going to talk about some of those additional phases today. For the purposes of our time today, I'm going to focus on foundation funders as opposed to individual or corporate donors. And the first thing we're going to look at is this graph. Hope everybody can see it. The grant cycle. And the phases that are outlined in red are the ones we're going to focus on today. The first phase, obviously, is to identify potential donors. And I did happen to do a previous SKC Growth Exchange presentation about how to find potential funders. And that link to that presentation will be located on the last slide with the other resources. So, as I said, the first phase is identifying potential donors. Then you need to, of course, carefully scrutinize the funders and make sure there's alignment with your organization and no particular specifications that would rule your organization out from applying. And then we're going to talk about the pre-application process. This is the cultivation phase. This is where you make initial contact with the funder. You might set up an interview or a time to chat, and we'll go into more detail about how to go about that in a minute. Then the next phase is the application itself. That's the portion of grant writing that most people think of when they think of what does a grant writer do or what does grant writing entail. That's the ask, the paper or computer document that you have to submit in order to be considered for the funding. The next phase, I'm going to call this the post-application phase. Some funders require follow-up interviews, site visits, additional documents, and especially if you are a newer organization, you may not have experience with having site visits. So I'm going to spend quite a bit of time talking about how to prepare for a site visit from a funder. And finally, and I would say equally as important as all the beginning phases, you need to update your funder, thank your funder, and recognize your funder about the gift that they gave. This can get neglected. Once you receive that grant award check, it's really easy to go back to focus on your program. But if you want to receive funding from or partner with this funder in the future, it's crucial to make that relationship a constant part of your grant process. So if we talk about the pre-application phase a little bit, we're going to talk about making the initial approach with the funder. So once you've carefully reviewed a funder's website, you've looked at their board and staff list to see if there's any alignment, you've looked at their 990 to see who they've recently funded, the next step should be to contact the funder by email or telephone, unless they specifically say that they do not want to be contacted or they have another method, such as going directly to a questionnaire on their website or a letter of inquiry or something like that. So when you make this initial contact with the funder, this is not a sales call. You shouldn't feel like you're trying to sell them something, like it's a cold call from a salesman. You shouldn't feel like you are bothering the funder. It is their job, it is their mission to fund nonprofits, and it's their goal to find suitable programs to fund. If you're familiar with the foundation directory online, and if anyone is not and has questions about that at the end, let me know. But if you research a funder on the foundation directory online, they usually have a how to apply section, and that has contact information for the funders and steps that the funder wants you to follow in order to initiate that contact. Do not, under any circumstances, contact the funder without doing your research first. You want to already know the basics about the organization, what they're going to fund. I usually recommend that initially you would send an email to request a time for a phone call rather than making a phone call first. If you get no response to your email, then you can call the funder directly. If you can't find a phone number, you can look at their 990 online. Sometimes the phone number on the 990 will be for their accountant or the funder's treasurer, but usually they can get you to the right place. If you can't get a response by phone or email, or the funder says they don't accept unsolicited phone calls, you can, at this point, send a brief written letter through the mail to the funder as kind of a last resort. This letter is a little less formal than an LOI that we'll talk about later. It's just an introduction letter and asks how and whether you can initiate contact. You want to personalize your approach when you make the initial contact with a funder. Tailor your approach specifically. Avoid a generic document or proposal. Reference the funder's previous grants. Reference their current initiatives, and explain how your project specifically aligns with their funding interests. This shows them that you've done your research and will increase your chances of getting their attention. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is to take this 10 or 15 minutes to chat with a funder, because it can save you hours and hours and expense spent on a grant application that is not going to be the right fit. This initial contact can be used to make a connection between your programming and the funder's interest areas. And if that connection is not there, you should not invest additional time and resources. But you should be prepared with information about additional programs in case the funder lets you know that they have other initiatives and one of your other programs might turn out to be a better fit. Look to the funder to provide the next steps and follow up quickly with whatever those are. Send a brief thank you email to the funder if you had a conversation with them, just to thank them for their time, even if the contact did not result in a funding match. And just remember that cultivating relationships with funders is a long-term process. If you are a newer organization, it's not going to happen in the first few months or even the first few years. And there's no one size fits all method to building these relationships. You have to take each funder as it comes. Even if your initial contact does not result in an invitation to submit a grant, you should still maintain a positive relationship, thank them for their consideration. You never know when they might have additional opportunities. But you also need to respect their boundaries. If their response is clearly, do not submit an unsolicited request, we won't ever fund an organization that does what yours does, take the hint and step back. If you just get, well, we don't have the funding for this right now, you can continue to strategically grow the relationship. And the next step after that initial contact might be that a funder will ask you to submit an LOI. And there's no clear consensus on what LOI stands for. It can stand for letter of inquiry, letter of intent, letter of interest. The LOI can be something with set questions that you submit through a funder's grant portal, or it can be a letter or email from your organization to the funder. Whatever the case, the LOI is a formal document that serves as a preliminary step in the grant application process. It's typically submitted to express your interest in applying for a grant. And the purpose is to allow the funder to be able to tell whether your proposed project aligns with their funding priorities and requirements. It's goal is to provide a brief overview of the project and demonstrate why the funder should consider it. If you are drafting your own, I recommend that you keep it no more than a couple pages, unless you're including additional materials like photographs or an annual report. You want it to be short and sweet unless you are following specifications of the funder. If you're drafting your own LOI to a funder, you should include these specific components. You want to introduce your organization and state your intent to apply for a grant. Give a very brief history of your organization. State your mission, your purpose, your vision. And then a very concise description of your project. A lot of organizations don't have specific projects. Your project may be your entire organization. You have one project, one goal, and that's fine there. So when I say project, that should be used interchangeably with your organization if that is the case for your particular agency. You want to include, again, very brief summary of your goals, objectives, and expected outcomes, as well as the audience that you serve. And probably the most important part of the LOI is explaining how your project or your organization aligns with the funder's mission, goals, and priorities. And you don't want to just spit their mission and goals back at them. Take some time to really analyze and change the language about how what you do fits in with what they fund. Most LOIs want you to indicate the specific funding amount that you're asking for. There are a few out there that will specifically say, we will tell you how much you're going to ask for. So take that into account. Again, check the funder's 990 to see the range that they have funded in the past. If this is your first ask, I recommend that you ask at the bottom of that range or in the middle of the range and not go straight to the top unless your initial contact with the funder has said, yes, please go ahead and ask for all the money. Another really important thing in the letter of intent is your contact information. I've had experiences where clients have sent letters of intent and they don't include their phone number or their return address, and the funder has to hunt that down to get back in touch with them. So I recommend that you include your contact information both on your letterhead or as a footer in the document, as well as in the body of your letter. And be sure to include your phone number, your email address, and your organization's website. I am going to provide with the grant materials that you'll receive after the presentation a document that's a letter of inquiry questionnaire. And this document has some questions that will assist you with organizing the information that you will need for your LOI. So now we're going to assume that all your pre-proposal work has paid off and you are invited to submit a full application to the funder. And you've done this according to their parameters and in a timely fashion. So we're going to skip ahead to the post-application process. You have turned in the grant application, but you don't have the check yet. You want to immediately follow up if you submitted an application by mail. Yes, there are still funders out there that want you to mail in 8 full copies of your paper application and all the attachments. If you are working with one of those, you might want to follow up with a phone call after about a week just to make sure they got it through the regular mail. Most grants go through online portals. You'll get immediate confirmation that your grant application was received. If the funder wants to conduct a site visit and contacts you about that, that is a really good sign that they are interested in funding your application and want to know more. Site visits can also occur after a grant is awarded or right before the conclusion of a grant to see exactly how the funding was spent. But the same preparation for the visit is going to apply to those situations as well. So a site visit is really just a funder wanting to meet with someone on your staff or leadership team at your office or location with the intent to understand more about what you do and how you do it. Usually, as I said, this is part of the decision-making process for the grant, but it can also come after a grant is funded. And it's really important to prepare for this site visit because it's a very important step for you to showcase your organization, your work, and make a positive impression on the funder. Site visits can give the funder insights that just reading your application is not going to give them. Most funders that I have had the privilege of working with say that these site visits are the best part of their job. They're the most informative, the most interesting, and the most fun. It's a chance for them to connect with the people that are doing the work and learn firsthand about what they need. And they can also really see firsthand your leadership, your staff, your board's enthusiasm for your mission and your commitment to it. So to successfully prepare for a site visit, I recommend that the first thing you do is find out what the funder wants to accomplish. What are their goals? What is the purpose of the site visit? When you schedule the visit, ask what they want to see. Ask how long they want the visit to be. Ask if there's anyone in particular they want to be included on the visit, such as clients or staff or volunteers. You want to prepare at least a rough agenda for the visit, a timeline, including how much time will be spent on giving a tour, how much time will be spent on witnessing a volunteer activity or a client interaction. It's also a good idea to look up exactly who's going to be visiting. You can read their profile on the funder website. If you can't get information that way, go to LinkedIn, Google, see what you can learn about the individual's role within the organization or any other useful information about their background. It's just going to make the site visit go that much more smoothly. You want to arrange the visit for a time the funder can see your programs in action. If you're a school, don't schedule the site visit for the summer if you can help it. Just try to be realistic within the funder's parameters about the time for the visit so they can see your organization doing its work. Have volunteers present, have clients present. Having a board member present is a good way to show the funder that you have an engaged board. Be sure to provide anyone from your organization, be it staff, board, volunteer, leadership, provide them with key talking points so everyone's on the same page when communicating with the funder. Make sure your space is tidy. You want to give that good first impression. I know certain organizations do not lend themselves to tidy work, but do your best to make sure that it's uncluttered so the funder gets a good first impression. You will want to make a small folder for each person that's going to visit with a copy of your grant application, any brochures, any annual reports or newsletters. Keep this very simple and brief. Don't include all the attachments to your grant application. They don't need a copy of your 990s. Don't overload them with materials. And you can also send this out to them electronically as well. You want to reread your grant application so the details are fresh in your mind. A significant amount of time can pass between submitting that initial application and the site visit actually happening. If you're going to have staff or board members present, have them read the application in advance as well. And once the funder arrives, make sure You show them anything in particular they want to see or have questions about. When they first arrive is a good time to show them a summary video about your organization if you have one, or any videos of recent publicity. During the visit, be sure to be prepared to discuss your project budget. Explain why your organization is unique and thoroughly answer all their questions. Show interest in the foundation and other things it supports. Even if this foundation doesn't end up funding your program, you may learn about other initiatives or other funding opportunities that they do offer. And if you have time, it's always a good idea to talk about your partnerships and collaborations with other organizations. This is something that I'm seeing more and more from funders, that they want nonprofits to have a lot of partnerships and collaborations. They want to invest in agencies that other people are supporting. So it's always a good idea to share that information. And once again, end the visit with a reiteration of your contact information in case the funder thinks of additional questions after the visit. This helps keep the lines of communication open and demonstrates your commitment to building a lasting relationship with the funder. If you're well prepared, organized, transparent, you can make a really good case for this funder's support. And on the slide, you can see an example of some of the questions you should be prepared to ask that a funder might ask. And I'm not going to read through those now, but you can use those for reference as you are preparing for a site visit. So the next phase is the application will either be approved or denied. And hopefully it's approved. Once you receive notice that you've received an award, you want to provide an immediate and appropriate thank you and recognition to the funder. And we'll talk more in depth later about other ways to thank the funder. But you should also send a thank you to any specific individuals who helped with your receiving the grant. A person who came on the site visit, a contact you have in the organization, someone you know on their board, anyone else that played a part should get an initial quick thank you. If you don't receive a grant award, again, this is not the end of the relationship. You should not take a denial personally. There are many, many, many reasons that grants are not awarded. Learn what you can from the process and move on. If you receive a written communication that your request is denied, send a polite response, thanking the foundation for considering your request and for giving you the opportunity. If, this is going to depend on the circumstances, but if you feel that it's applicable, you can mention the following things when you respond: that you hope to have the opportunity to apply for funding from them again in the future, that you appreciate a personal connection that assisted you with getting access to the application, that you would like some feedback on how to strengthen your application for the next grant cycle. But you need to keep in mind that not all funders will provide feedback. Not all funders will even send a written denial. You just will never hear from them again. So you may never know why your grant was funded or not funded, and that is okay. If you are given the opportunity to receive feedback, if the funder has mentioned that this is something that they do, some questions to ask on this would be, can you tell me if there was a particular problem with my proposal? Would you suggest we apply again? And if so, when? Do you have any other suggestions as to how we could strengthen our proposal? And finally, it can't hurt to ask, do you know of any other funders that may align more closely with our program or with our goals? If you're told that you can apply or should apply again, go ahead and do so. I recommend to clients, there's a 3 strikes rule. If you apply to a funder 3 times and they don't give you any grant award or other partnership, it is time to take the hint and move on to different funders, unless of course there's a major shift with what the funder is choosing to fund or with what your organization is deciding to do. So now we're going to talk about the important part of the grant process, which is thanking the funder, recognizing the funder, and updating the funder. And the reasons that these things are all important is you want to set the stage for future funding. You want this funder to have a pleasant funding experience with your organization. So the first thing we're going to talk about are different ways that you can keep foundation funders updated. And I'm sure you can think of some of the obvious ones here. Newsletters, sending them emails, sending them your annual report. All of those are excellent ways to keep your funders updated. A lot of funders will, of course, require specific reporting that is part of their formal process. But just because a report isn't required does not mean you shouldn't send one. If formal reports are not required, I recommend that you do send an informal interim report at a period about halfway through the grant term, and then an additional final report at the end of the grant term. At the very minimum, you should send some sort of report or update before a new funding ask, if at all possible. You want to maintain a good relationship with the funder, and doing these informal reports are a good way to do that. I will talk about a little bit the components of an informal report, and I will also provide a sample document with the presentation materials. Reporting is a tool that is sometimes underutilized if your project is not going quite as planned. Funders want to hear about any challenges or snags as early on as possible in the grant term. You can talk to your funder about adjusting your goals or outcomes if you need to, so that when you do provide those final outcomes, you're reporting on adjusted goals, not the original ones. And that is going to make your final report look a lot better. Also, if there are any major changes to your budget or to your program, you want to communicate those directly to your funder as soon as they become known. I've had really good luck with clients who have had to share challenges with funders, especially during COVID, and having the funders be very accommodating with either unrestricting the funds or other ways to make it easier for the organization client. So be transparent with the funder. It will only help you in the end. You can connect with funders on social media, sign up to like their sites. That's a good way to see if they are posting about you from their end. You can invite them to a special event that your organization is having. You can give them free tickets. You can give them a tour to see your organization. You can also just send casual check-ins via email. You want the funder to know that you continue to appreciate their support even after that check has cleared. If you have a personal relationship with someone at the funder, keep up that relationship, invite the person for coffee, do what you can to foster that connection. Informal report guidelines. We're just going to talk briefly about this because, as I said, there will be an example included in the materials. If you're writing your own informal report, use photos. Say thank you at the beginning. I think that's obvious, but some clients like to include a cover thank you letter, and you can add photos there. You also, of course, will want to talk about what activities you've been doing with the grant, what your organization is doing with the actual funding, how it's being spent, what activities have been implemented so far. You want to highlight areas where maybe you've exceeded your original goals for the grant, as well as mention any areas where you've not been on target. It's, again, always good to err on the side of transparency with your funders. If you have volunteers, include those details. You can let the funder know how many people volunteered, how many total hours you had of volunteers, and the different things they contributed to the project. Also, let the funder know about partner organizations and how they supported the project as well. You want to share some data that shows the difference the funding has made to your organization. You don't just have to use numbers to share the impact. Funders really like quotes, testimonials, photographs, stories, videos that are a direct result of what you were able to do with their funding. And as we talked about a little bit previously, if you've changed anything since your initial grant proposal, you want to bring this up with the funder in your informal report. A lot of funders that require formal reports have a section called challenges and lessons learned. And even though these are difficult to write, I would encourage you to include at least a brief section if you're creating your own informal report for a funder. Just talk about any factors that presented a challenge and the lessons you learned from this and how you will or did use these challenges to improve your programming or your efforts. Funders don't expect every project to run 100% perfectly all the time. So sharing these challenges can highlight that your organization is resilient and creative, and it can also help your funder advise other organizations that have similar challenges. So even though it's hard to write, that is a really helpful portion of an informal report. You also want to just mention briefly at the end future plans for your organization or program and any additional funding you've gotten. Like I said before, funders want to fund agencies and programs that other people are funding and partnering with and collaborating. So when they see, hey, you've gotten some other grants that are going to support this program, that makes them feel like they have backed a good participant and a good steward of their funds. Thanking foundation funders. The trend in this area is that funders are leaning away from wanting items such as a plaque or a coffee mug or a t-shirt in terms of receiving recognition from grantees. Funders say that the most valued recognition that they receive is a personal thank you, either in a letter or a phone call from the executive director or a board member. And studies have shown that funders are more likely to donate again if they received a personal thank you, and are less likely to fund a project again if they did not receive that. And another way, and I think one of the best ways to show your gratitude to funders, is to follow their guidelines. A lot of funders, especially the larger ones, go to a lot of trouble to make these detailed guidelines about what they want grant recipients to do. You should thoroughly review their grant award acceptance letters or correspondence, keep track of their report deadlines. You don't want to jeopardize future funding. A lot of funders will ask you for a logo or photographs to showcase the grant on their end, and be sure to comply with these requests promptly. You don't want the funder to have to chase you down for these things. Handwritten thank you notes, still appreciated. Have your board sign or a thank you note, or your board chair. Any personal touch that you can show gratitude to the funder is appreciated. You can have your volunteers and board members help with this task. That is something that volunteers say is a task that they like to be involved in. For a large gift, you might want to consider a press release or a media release. Make sure you have express permission from the funder to do this. This provides good press for both the funder and your organization. A social media statement, similarly, little less formal way to reach a wide audience, but again, should only be used with the funder's permission. Because posting to a bunch of different socials can be time consuming, especially if you don't have dedicated staff for this purpose, you might want to look at some free tools for managing multiple social media feeds. A good one that some of my clients have recommended is called Sprout Social. This allows you to schedule posts across all your platforms in advance, and you're just writing down the information once. And kind of older traditional way to recognize donors is a donor recognition board. You go into a nonprofit's building, and there on the wall is a list of the donors. And this is still a great way to recognize those funders, but you can also do it virtually. Have a virtual donor recognition board on your website. As we discussed in keeping funders updated, giving them tickets to your special events serve the dual purpose of both thanking the funder and keeping them in the loop about your activities. And finally, just if you ever run into anyone from the funder in person, personally express your appreciation to them. This genuine face-to-face thank you will leave a lasting impression on the funder, and it really reinforces the value that you place on their support. A final thing you can do is see if the funder is interested in exploring opportunities for collaboration in addition to their financial support. Some funders make it clear in the application process that they would like to send you volunteers, but others don't. You can suggest that. You can suggest projects where their expertise or their networks would be helpful to you. There are a lot of ways that funders can contribute in addition to writing checks. And this just goes toward that stewardship, that building the long-term partnership with funders. That is the main part of what I wanted to talk about today. I have just a couple of additional tips that I came across when I was researching for this presentation. The first one that I thought was interesting is about mission statements. And I know once an organization has come up with their mission statement, it can sometimes be a difficult process, and they don't want to have to do it or rethink it ever again. But I did see something recently, and I think it's a good idea for nonprofits to periodically review their mission statement language. And the tip was that your mission statement should not only convey what it is that you do, but also why you do it. So using the example of Support Kansas City, our mission statement is to provide nonprofit organizations with business and development expertise, empowering them to focus on their missions. So you can see that we've included what we do, We provide nonprofits with business and development expertise, but we've also included why we do it, so they are empowered to focus on their missions. I was looking at a list of some different mission statements, and I was surprised at how many did not include the why. So I would encourage you to take a look at yours and make sure you explain the why of what you do. Just another little tip, if you do not have your organization signed up for Google Alerts, that's something I would recommend. You can sign up with Google for free to monitor your organization's name. And this way, when anything out there on the internet mentions your organization, you'll get a notification. This is an easy way to see when and how funders are recognizing you. So let's say you get an alert that your funder posted on their website that they gave you a grant. This is the perfect opportunity to communicate with them and say, hey, I saw the piece you put up. Thank you for highlighting our organization. One last little tip about writing. As I was researching information for this presentation, I came across a writer from the early 2000s. His name is Tony Proccio. You may or may not have heard of him. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. I will put a link in the resources section. He wrote several books and articles about avoiding jargon in grant writing and how important it is to use plain language. I think a lot of these essays are a good read and still relevant today. One of his articles is entitled Bad Words for Good, and it advises against the use of jargon that we are probably all way too familiar with in the nonprofit world. Examples like paradigm shift. And I think that's one that hopefully is going away, but there are others that I'm conscious of that I'm still using. Leverage, stakeholder, continuum. And I think we all should work to try to make our grant applications as accessible and as easily readable as possible to achieve clarity in our writing. So that's just some food for thought to end the session as we all try to write the best grant applications that we can. And hopefully now you have some tips to engage in those important pre-application and post-application parts of the grant process.